Bruce Leroy's glowing fist made this movie a cult classic overnight, but the story behind the camera is even stranger than anything on screen. Get ready for 14 wild revelations that will completely change how you watch this film. From casting twists nobody saw coming to a legal gamble that almost sank the entire production. And stick around because there's one jaw-dropping bonus fact at the end that almost nobody talks about. So speed up with me because the list starts right now. Number 1. Denzel Washington auditioned for the hero and the villain picture, an audition room in 1984 where one actor could have played either the hero or the villain of this movie. And somehow that actor still didn't get the part. Long before he became one of the most respected leading men in Hollywood, Denzel Washington walked into casting for this film and read for both Bruce Leroy and Shonuff, two characters sitting on opposite ends of the story's moral spectrum. At the time, Washington was still an up-and-coming actor, years away from the acclaim that would come with Malcolm X and Training Day. Yet he impressed the casting team enough that they considered him for the gentle martial artist and the flamboyant villain in the same breath. That kind of range is rare, and it says a lot about how much raw talent was circling this low-budget passion project before it ever got made. He wasn't the only future star in the room either. Wesley Snipes tried out for the lead, Laurence Fishburne read for a role, and Mario Van Peebles and fitness icon Billy Blanks were also in serious contention. Imagine an alternate universe where any of these actors ended up in the neon suit instead of the unknown newcomer who eventually got the part. The film that resulted would have looked completely different, and the cult following this movie enjoys today might never have happened at all. It's worth remembering that casting rooms like this one rarely feel historic in the moment. Nobody sitting behind that table in 1984 knew they were watching a future EGOT-adjacent legend read lines for a low-budget martial arts comedy, and that's exactly what makes the story so fun to look back on now. Hollywood is full of these quiet what-if moments, but few are as stacked with future talent as this single casting call. Number 2. The lead was the very last actor cast. Here's something strange. The actor playing the main character was the last person hired on the entire production. Taimak, the martial artist chosen to play Bruce Leroy, walked into his first audition with zero acting experience of any kind. A huge risk for a film with a $10 million budget. He heard about the casting call through the martial arts community, since producers were searching specifically for a person of color who could headline a kung fu-inspired movie. And at the time, he happened to be training under Ron Van Cleef, one of the film's own fight choreographers. His first audition was reportedly a disaster. He had assumed the casting team would want a martial arts demonstration, not a cold reading of dialogue, and it showed. Rather than walk away, he spent an entire month teaching himself the basics of acting before coming back for a second try in front of Motown founder Berry Gordy, and the improvement was dramatic enough to land him the role on the spot. Even after casting, the work wasn't finished. Gordy personally coached him throughout the shoot, because the entire movie hinged on audiences believing this earnest, Bruce Lee-obsessed martial artist was a real person and not just a fighter reciting lines. It's a genuinely unusual way to build a movie star. Most leading roles go to trained actors who then learn a physical skill for the part. But here the production reversed the entire process, betting that raw authenticity in the fighting could carry a performer through his acting growing pains. Looking back, that gamble paid off in a way few studios would risk today. If you are enjoying this, take 2 seconds and leave a like. Subscribe if you want more videos like this. That support really motivates my work and helps a lot with bringing more content. Number 3. The villain didn't actually know martial arts. Julius Carry made Shonuff, the self-proclaimed shogun of Harlem, feel like the most dangerous man in New York City. But off-camera, he couldn't throw a real punch. His background was entirely in stage acting, built over 4 years with a Chicago theater company before he ever moved to Los Angeles. And he had no martial arts training whatsoever when he landed the role. Once filming started, the production had to bring in veteran fight choreographer Ron Van Cleef to teach him, essentially from scratch, how to move like someone who had spent decades training in combat. That crash course wasn't gentle. During one grueling session using fighting sticks, Carry ended up bruised and exhausted, and in a moment of frustration, he reportedly told his trainer, in that same booming Shonuff voice, that he was an actor and not a martial artist, before declaring he was heading straight to Burger King. What ultimately sold the performance wasn't years of training, but natural athleticism paired with total commitment, plus plenty of help from stunt double Billy Taylor for the trickier fight choreography. It's a reminder that some of the most convincing action performances in movie history were built entirely on acting instinct rather than actual combat skill. Compare that to actors who spend years training in a specific discipline before ever stepping in front of a camera. And Carrey's crash course looks almost impossible in hindsight. Yet audiences left theaters convinced they had just watched one of the most intimidating martial artists on screen that decade. Proof that confidence and physicality can sometimes fool a viewer just as effectively as genuine expertise. Number 4. Vanity walked away from Purple Rain for this role. Before she ever stepped onto this set, Vanity was supposed to be starring in one of the biggest musical films of the decade instead. Born Denise Matthews, she had originally been cast opposite Prince in Purple Rain, but in the summer of 1983, she abruptly split from both the project and from Prince himself, walking away from her role as lead singer of Vanity 6, the group he had built and named after her. That breakup was personal as much as professional, and it opened the door for Apollonia Cotero to take the Purple Rain role that could have made Vanity a household name in an entirely different movie. Instead, Motown founder Berry Gordy signed her to a 4-picture deal and immediately cast her as television host Laura Charles, giving her both a starring role and a showcase for her music, including her song Seventh Heaven on the soundtrack. It's fascinating to think about how differently both films and both careers might have unfolded if she had stayed the course with Prince, instead of choosing an entirely new creative path with Motown. Number 5. There are no deleted scenes because nothing was ever cut. When the 30th anniversary Blu-ray came out, fans expecting bonus deleted scenes got nothing, and that's because none exist at all. This wasn't a curatorial choice made decades later. It came from just how tightly the production had to run back in 1984 and 1985. Every foot of film stock cost real money in that era, long before digital cameras made unlimited takes practical, so the crew had almost no room to shoot alternate versions or scenes that might not survive the final cut. Director Michael Schultz and his team had to plan nearly every shot with precision before rolling cameras, which meant getting each scene right essentially on the first try. That kind of budget discipline was common on lower-cost productions throughout the 80s, but it's still rare to find a finished film where literally everything captured on camera made it to theaters. What audiences see today is exactly what was shot, frame for frame, with nothing left behind in a studio vault. Number 6. The arrow-catching stunt took 2 hours to nail. The opening training sequence shows Bruce Leroy snatching an arrow out of midair with a single chop, and it's real. There were no visual effects involved, just precise timing between Taimak and the crew members firing the arrow toward him. The scene was designed to instantly establish his advanced skill level right from the start of the movie, but pulling it off safely required split-second coordination that took far longer than anyone expected. What should have been a quick shot ended up eating 2 full hours of filming time, because the arrow had to be fired at exactly the right trajectory and moment for Taimak to intercept it without getting hurt. Even a slightly mistimed shot could have caused a real injury, so every attempt had to be carefully controlled. When they finally captured the take that made the final cut, it gave the whole crew confidence that they could pull off the more ambitious action sequences still ahead of them, and it helped establish Taimak's credibility early, at a point when he was still learning how to act in every other scene. Number 7. A future Oscar nominee has a blink-and-miss-it role, long before Fargo or Shameless made him a household name: William H. Macy was just another working actor trying to pay rent in New York, and one of his early jobs was a tiny part in this movie. He plays a character named JJ, some kind of producer figure trying to convince Laura Charles to air a music video for the girlfriend of mob boss Eddie Arcadian. It's such a minor role that plenty of viewers miss him completely on a first watch, since his scenes are mostly background business dealings rather than anything flashy. Even the credits undersell him, listing him simply as W.H. Macy, the shortened version of his name he used before he had built up enough recognition for a full byline to matter. It's the kind of humble, easy-to-miss gig that almost every future star takes early in their career while waiting for their real breakthrough, which for Macy came years later through his collaborations with David Mamet and the Coen brothers. Number 8. Securing Bruce Lee footage nearly sank the entire film. This movie's entire premise depends on Bruce Leroy's obsession with Bruce Lee, which meant actual Bruce Lee footage wasn't optional, it was essential. And yet the production moved forward with filming before it had actually locked down the legal rights to use it. Several key scenes, including moments built around Enter the Dragon, aren't just decorative references. They directly explain why Bruce Leroy behaves the way he does, right down to disguising himself as a pizza delivery man after watching Lee do something similar on screen. Without that footage, those scenes lose their meaning entirely, and the character's motivation falls apart. If the rights holders had refused permission or demanded more money than the production could afford, there was no backup plan, and the entire $10 million budget would have been at risk. The negotiations dragged on, ate into the schedule, and created real uncertainty about whether the film could even be finished as written. Everything worked out in the end, but building an entire movie around a legal clearance that hadn't been secured yet remains one of the riskiest gambles in its production history. Modern productions rarely take that kind of chance, since studios today typically lock down every licensing agreement before a single scene is scheduled. Back then, with a smaller budget and a tighter timeline, the filmmakers essentially bet the entire project on a handshake deal coming through. And it's the kind of decision that could have ended the production before it ever reached theaters. Before we keep going, subscribe if you haven't yet. Drop a comment telling me which movie or show you want me to cover next with strange behind-the-scenes facts. I read every single one. Number 9. The mysterious master's name is a hidden multilingual joke. Buried inside this film's plot is one of its cleverest and most overlooked jokes. Hidden in the name of the wise master, Bruce Leroy spends the whole story trying to track down. Most viewers assume Master Sum Dum Goy is simply a Chinese-sounding name that fits the movie's martial arts setting, but the screenwriters built it as a layered pun. Spoken aloud, the syllables also form a Yiddish phrase used to describe a non-Jewish person, creating a joke that lands differently depending on which language you're hearing it through. That kind of cultural mashup mirrors the entire premise of the film, which follows an African-American protagonist who has fully immersed himself in Chinese martial arts tradition. The joke deepens even further once Bruce Leroy actually reaches the fortune cookie factory and discovers that Master Sum Dum Goy isn't a person at all, just a computer program spitting out fortune cookie messages. The revelation that this supposedly wise master is, quite literally, some dumb machine adds one more layer to a joke about looking outward for wisdom that was inside Bruce Leroy the whole time. Number 10. The director's own son got manhandled by the villain. During the tense movie theater confrontation, where Shonuff and his crew interrupt a screening of Enter the Dragon, the villain grabs a random kid in the crowd and lifts him by the jacket just to prove a point. That kid wasn't a random extra. It was Brandon Schultz, the real-life son of director Michael Schultz. Casting a director's relative in a small role isn't unusual in filmmaking, but it's rarer for that family member to end up getting physically intimidated by the film's towering 6-foot-plus antagonist. For young Brandon, that meant getting genuinely up close with Julius Carry's fully committed, theatrical performance as Shonuff in a scene specifically designed to show the villain is willing to threaten anyone, bystanders included, just to get Bruce Leroy's attention. It's a small, personal touch that also reinforces the film's larger tribute to Bruce Lee, since The Interrupted Movie is one of Lee's most iconic films. Brandon Schultz can now say he was physically lifted by one of the most memorable villains in 80s martial arts cinema, all while his own father watched from behind the camera. Number 11. The villain stayed in character to psych out his co-star. Julius Carry didn't just play Shonuff on camera, he stayed in that headspace for much of the shoot, deliberately blurring the line between performance and reality. Because Taimak was still an inexperienced actor learning how to generate real emotion on cue, Carry decided the fastest way to build authentic tension between them was to actually provoke him off-screen as well as on. It worked almost too well. Carry later admitted the intensity started bleeding into his own sleep, describing vivid dreams where he was fighting the film's real martial arts advisors and waking up drenched in sweat from the intensity of it. Taimak later shared one especially memorable example of just how far Carry took it, recalling a scene where he was supposed to throw a punch, and Carry took the hit so literally that he actually tried to bite down on his fist, turning the phrase knuckle sandwich into something disturbingly literal. That unpredictability kept Taimak constantly on edge during filming, which in turn produced genuinely raw reactions on camera and helped build the real sense of rivalry that still makes their confrontation so memorable today. Number 12. Berry Gordy insisted his name be part of the title. When it came time to finalize the film's official title, Motown founder Berry Gordy made an unusual demand. He wanted the movie credited not simply under its own name, but with his own name attached directly to it. The same way a director's name sometimes gets folded into a film's branding. It wasn't a request, it was a condition. Gordy pointed to director Robert Altman's 1977 film 3 Women, which had been officially released under a similarly possessive title to emphasize Altman's personal, creative vision. The comparison was a little shaky, though, since Altman had actually written that film's script himself, while Gordy was serving purely as executive producer on a screenplay written by someone else entirely. Still, director Michael Schultz chose not to push back, understanding just how essential Gordy's financial backing and industry connections were to getting the film finished at all. The possessive title ended up on every poster, marquee, and piece of marketing material tied to the release, a lasting reminder of just how much personal ownership Gordy wanted over this project. It's a small piece of branding that says a lot about the era when music industry moguls were increasingly stepping into film production and wanted audiences to know exactly whose vision they were watching. Whether or not the comparison to Altman fully held up, the gesture stuck. And it's part of why this title still reads a little differently than a typical 80s action movie poster. Number 13. One filming location was a real kosher Chinese restaurant. Some of the most authentic texture in this movie came from the real New York City locations the production chose, and one restaurant in particular perfectly captured the film's whole theme of cultures colliding. Bernstein's on Essex was an actual kosher Chinese restaurant, and the filmmakers shot there with the original decor left completely untouched. It's a small detail that mirrors the entire story, where Jewish dietary tradition and Chinese cuisine sit side by side, not unlike Bruce Leroy's own fusion of African-American identity with Chinese martial arts culture. Using a real working restaurant instead of building a set gave the film a layer of authenticity that would have been almost impossible to fake on a soundstage. On the opposite end of the location spectrum, the climactic showdown between Bruce Leroy and Shonuff was filmed inside the abandoned Washburn Wire Works in Spanish Harlem, a massive, decaying wire factory that crew members reportedly described as both filthy and genuinely sound dangerous to work in. That crumbling industrial setting gave the final fight an apocalyptic visual edge, and since the building has since been demolished, this film is one of the last records of what that piece of New York actually looked like. Quick reminder to subscribe if you are enjoying these revelations, and tell me in the comments, do you know any strange fact about this movie that I didn't mention? Let's build the list together. Number 14. The script was rewritten overnight to save $2 million. Midway through pre-production, studio executives dropped a bombshell. The budget needed to shrink by $2 million practically overnight. Out of a total production budget of only $10 million, that demand landed after major decisions about locations, cast size, and effects had already been locked in, leaving director Michael Schultz and screenwriter Louis Vanosta with almost no time to rethink the entire film. Rather than ask for days to figure it out, the two men checked into a hotel room and committed to rewriting the script in a single overnight sprint, trying to preserve the heart of the story while slashing anything expensive. At some point during that marathon session, Vanosta got so exhausted he fell asleep, and rather than wake him, Schultz kept working alone and ended up cutting 40 full pages from the script by himself. When Vanosta woke up the next morning, a huge chunk of their original screenplay was simply gone. The two of them then spent the rest of that day reworking what remained, finding ways to tell essentially the same story with a fraction of the resources and a much simpler production plan. That kind of overnight triage rarely produces a usable script, let alone one that still holds together well enough to shoot. And it's a testament to both writers that audiences can't easily spot the seams left behind by all that last-minute cutting. Plenty of productions have collapsed under far smaller budget cuts than this one, almost at the end, and the best is still coming. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next, and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this video is reaching. Bonus: 2 of its songs were nominated for the Worst Song Razzie. Here's the fact almost nobody brings up. This film actually landed 2 separate nominations for Worst Original Song at the 1985 Golden Raspberry Awards, the tongue-in-cheek anti-Oscars that roast the year's most questionable achievements in film. The 2 nominees were the movie's own main title theme, produced by Richard Perry, and Vanity's contribution to the soundtrack, a song called Seventh Heaven. On paper, that puts this film in the odd position of being singled out for some of the worst music of the year, at least according to Razzie voters who tend to zero in on anything campy or over the top. What makes it genuinely ironic is that the soundtrack was a real commercial hit, exposing a huge gap between critical opinion and what audiences actually responded to. In fact, the single biggest hit from the entire soundtrack wasn't even one of the Razzie nominees. Rhythm of the Night by DeBarge hit number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 and topped the R&B charts, helping drive album sales across the board. That gap between critical mockery and genuine popularity says everything about how this film has aged. Dismissed as silly by plenty of critics on release, it built a devoted cult following over the decades that embraces exactly the qualities original reviewers looked down on, proving that being nominated for the worst doesn't mean you can't end up being unforgettable. And those were 14 strange facts about this 80s cult classic, plus 1 bonus almost nobody talks about. This movie mattered more than its campy reputation ever gave it credit for, blending genres, cultures, and unlikely talent into something that's still being discovered by new audiences decades later. If you made it this far, leave a like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments which facts surprised you the most. And don't forget to suggest another movie that deserves its own list of strange facts. See you in the next video.